the business. So it's really critical that you know your story. The last piece of advice I'm going to give you as you prepare for this is to know your solution. You're going to be telling a lot of stories of things that happened and things that, like, obviously you've got now this past view into, but you're going to have to figure out what your plan is, right? This is your solution. So it's going to be great if you say, hey, great, here's our customer health, right? This is what it looks like for our entire portfolio, our book of business rather, right? And it'll fall flat if you don't have a plan. So this is what it is, right? Know your solution, be able to take the insights, dig deep into it, understand what's happening, but then your job as the leader there is to really craft a plan on how you're going to really capitalize on opportunities, enhance growth, and also mitigate risk. So all of the plans that you put in place should be in support of the things you've uncovered by looking at that data, unpacking those stories, and then putting together your plan. So this is really how you're going to craft this in a way that's going to set you up for success. So let's get into a couple examples. What I'm going to do is I've taken screenshots. So the images on the left are going to be an example of a slide that you might be including. And I'm going to give you some points here and we'll talk through each of these as we go through. So the first thing I always start with is an executive summary. And so something that I've done, even in like my former life as a CSM when QBRs and EBRs were still a thing, we always led with an executive summary. Right. And this was a great way to just illuminate all the key points that we'd want to get to in the conversation. It's kind of like your one pager, right? Like if I had to just have one thing that will just tell me all the things I need to know, if I had to run out, if I only had 10 minutes, couldn't stay for the whole meeting, what are the highs and lows, right? What are the most important things I should take away from our conversation? And that's what your executive summary should be. Think about it as like you're at a glance. Now, most of the time, as you're having these conversations, it is not uncommon. In fact, it's probably best practice that you're going to be sending your deck to the board in advance of your meeting. It'll give them an opportunity to review the data so that they have thoughtful questions, right? Again, you're going to have a dialogue. It's going to be very engaging. The best way to do that is to ensure that they're not seeing some of this for the first time. Having this included and doing one of these for every function in your business is a great way to get started. It's going to, again, make sure that they've got visibility into the key points. And listen, it is not unlikely that you might have to cut some things short. I've prepared a multitude of slides, had great stories, and really spent an entire session, my session in a board meeting, covering one slide. Because that's what was really driving in conversation, and that's where they wanted to dig. That's where we went. Now, in this case, the way that I've laid this out, I actually got this as a best practice from my friend Jay Nathan over at Higher Logic. He's like, Kristi, I use a 6-box. And so he actually showed me this format. And I was like, oh, I love this. It's better than just having a bunch of bullets here. So for me, I kind of stole this. I thought it was great. You can figure out what are the 6 things you want on your 6-box slide if you like this format. For me, we like to start with headlines, right? This is like, what is the key takeaways? We'll talk about some metrics, customer-based learnings, solutions, things that we're working towards. People information, really critical there as well. And then what are my priorities coming out of this quarter, maybe into the next quarter? So think about what are the elements that you want to compose your executive summary of. Like I said, for me, these are some examples, but you can cover a multitude of things. It's really, again, understanding your audience, what's going to be most important. Now, the next couple slides are all going to be tied to revenue metrics. Now, again, for simplicity's sake and for the fact that I recreated all these slides for you to have clean, made up data, you'll notice here that there's not a lot of text on these. Now, that's intentional just so I can give you a good big screenshot to include in my slides here. But one of the first things that I lead with is NRR. For a lot of companies, this has become the North Star metric because it's really telling about the potential your company has to accelerate beyond where they are today, right? Growth from your base. And so hopefully most of you on here know how to calculate NRR. I'm not going to go into that as a formula, but what I really enjoy doing here is not just having it for, 12-month trailing. I like to be able to show trends and to really show and glean insights from previous quarters and performance, right? We might start to see that, hey, every Q2 things drop a little bit, but Q3 pick up and Q4 even higher than that. These are going to help us understand behavioral changes over time. So I like to be able to kind of do things stacked over time. I think it's really great if you actually can add anecdotes to the slide as well. So different talking points that would suggest why things were really strong or why things didn't work out, just to have a few bulleted points there to help guide the conversation. But for me, my preference is to keep slides pretty clean, right? I don't want to make them overly wordy. The idea here is, again, these should be here to facilitate a conversation. And I should be really, really well versed on the story behind all of this. So a couple data points, really helpful to just help them understand that information. But again, you don't want to tell every single detail here. It's going to get really cluttered, but be able to have some of that historical data. Now, listen, I get it. Not everyone has access to 3 years of information. In fact, maybe your company wasn't even around for 3 years. But I will tell you, having just month to month or quarter to quarter might not necessarily tell the best story over time. So if you can go back, go back. If all you have is month to month, that's fine too. I will say I worked in an industry where we were in retail, e-commerce, and our customers stopped using our product from basically the end of October through mid-January because they shut down their website, right? They don't make any changes because they don't want to mess with the code during that time. This is the busy season for them. So they go into basically a lockdown. And so they didn't use our product, right? And so growth for us was really slow during those months, would pick up afterwards. I've worked with companies that are supporting education, right? We've got seasonality there too. So understanding your industry and the business that you're in also will help illuminate, like I said, different volatility, different patterns, really helpful for you to understand that. But leading with NRR is really going to tell a successful story for your business. The next thing I like to dig into is gross revenue retention. Now, why I like this is there's things you can't cover when you look at GRR, right? If you're just solely focused on net revenue retention, you could have a significant churn problem that is being masked by your successful ability to grow your customers. I worked at a company once, and when we looked at our NRR, that story was like high and to the right. I mean, it was growing month after month after month. And I'll tell you, the interesting thing there is we had one customer who was growing so fast and became like a several $1 million customer for us over time that everything else that happened, you'd like couldn't even see, right? Because all you saw was the NRR going up. So it made our business look really healthy. But when you peeled that growth back from that one customer, and we just looked at our gross revenue retention, it told a very different story. So I like this because it's dollars in, dollars out, right? There's nothing that you can do to influence this. Renewals that I had during this period of time, how many of the dollars did we start with, did we end with? And so I think being able to show all these different types of revenue metrics helps tell a different story. And it'll be interesting how you'll be able to use that data to really understand behavioral patterns, risk, opportunities. And so I think it is important to highlight most of these. The next thing I like here is logo retention. Now, just like net revenue retention covered some of the data within gross revenue retention, if you're only looking at those two, you might not understand what's happening with your customer base. Again, I worked in another company, and our littler customers, they were churning. I mean, like you couldn't keep them. Our big customers, they were staying and growing, but we had a real big churn problem, and we were throwing bodies and resources at this thing. But the reality of it is we realized if we didn't even sell to these customers, if we no longer supported customers of a certain size, our retention went up, our revenue went up, right? All of these things happened. But had we not been paying attention to logos, we might not have had that visibility to tell that story and change the trajectory of our business. And so it is important to dig into all these metrics because they're all going to tell you something different. And so, like I said, show these metrics, do quarter to quarter. You could see seasonal behaviors. It could be, hey, you know what? We scratched the product we had and we rebuilt something new. We changed the trajectory of our strategy, right? We were no longer supporting small customers. We went to big customers. And so maybe this like big dip here is when that happened. So we lost all these customers in Q3, but we started selling to new customers right in Q4. I'm making all these stories up, but hopefully you can find some patterns there that you'll be able to overlay with a really strong narrative to share with your board. So when I think about revenue metrics, those are three that I really like. Again, logo really isn't a revenue metric, but it's all tied to. So I love to lead with NRR. I like to follow with GRR, and then I do like to include that logo retention story there as well. Now, something else, and for most of you who are doing this, it's probably not uncommon that you're going to be providing forecasts. Anytime you're doing this, I like to kind of build it out for them. I don't want to just have high level numbers. I want to understand show them how I'm getting to the build. And so in this case, let's just say we're doing Q4. Now, again, I made up the data, so we're in Q4. So to suggest, here's what we've reviewed right now. here's the logo. I'm sorry, here's churned revenue. Here's what we've got committed, best case, pipeline, and risk, right? So it's important for you to kind of break that down. Be able to come up with a number, though, that's going to get as close as possible to what your reality will be. So if you see here, I've given some examples of how I might build this out. I might have a target of 93%, right? So this might be our company's target for our retention, our revenue retention might be 93%. And then I'm going to show, based on what we have committed, here's what I'm guaranteeing. We're not going to come below 87%. Here's going to be that revenue number. But based off of best case, I think we'll be able to build to 2.3, which will bring us to 94%. So I'm helping give some visibility and a close range of where we're going to land, but I'm helping build this. Now, this slide is just composed of numbers. A really great addition to this narrative, and again, I didn't build all these slides from scratch for you guys, but would be to include some logos and some stories there, right? What are the swing deals for you? For example, you might have 2 or 3 deals that are going to be the difference between you getting from 87% to 94%. Or maybe there's one that's really going to help you. So it's important to make sure that you're telling this story, not just straight numbers, but give them the storyline, right? Talk through the customers who are going to impact this. And like I said, you can include logos on your slide. You can have a different slide here that would support this and say, here's our build, here's what I'm forecasting. Let me tell you how we're going to get to our best case. And your next slide might just be logos and stories and current status and like where we are in the renewal conversations. So you can build and go deeper on these and provide visuals. What I will tell you is the boards that I've usually worked with, they love the customer stories. It helps really pull all this information together. So the more often I was able to do it and put some, data there to support it with a story, made more sense to them. They understood. In fact, the logos often helped them realize how they can help. For example, I was in a board meeting once and I said, you know what, these are our 3 swing deals for the quarter. If we get 2 or 3 of these in, we'll be able to hit target. If we miss 2 of these, there's no way. And pulling those logos up and giving the story, one of my board members was like, oh, actually, I'm good friends with the CEO over that company. Let me reach out. Let me see what I can do. And this is the real value that your board brings, right? They've got these really amazing relationships and access to people you don't realize. And so what I want to do is introduce some of my swing deals, because again, this is a joint effort. They're on my team. And as a result, my board member was able to reach out to the CEO and guaranteed that one of those customers signed their renewal. And, we ended up hitting target that month because of the information we were able to bring and the stories we were able to tell, and we got the support we needed to make that a reality. So this is really where that, again, the storytelling and the depth goes beyond just numbers, goes beyond just the data. It's really critical that you start to build this and you provide that information. Now, if you start to get further out, I've also worked with boards that don't want to just see the upcoming quarter. They want to go a little bit further out. In that case, you're not going to be able to get maybe as tight on a forecast. You might be able to make some guesstimates, and we'll show what that might look like. But what we did is we like to map out, well, what does the renewal health look like, right? How healthy is our book, and where could that net us out? And so being able to have some kind of visual here might help you say, okay, well, as we think about Q1, right? So January, February, March, if you're working off the calendar year, right? Okay, I have visuals here that suggest that the bigger the dot, the more the revenue. The color is going to help me understand the health. I can start to figure out, well, okay, based on this, here's what this is telling me, right? I've got X% of my revenue tied to renewals that are fairly healthy. These are the ones that are at risk. Again, provide some context on what those swing deals are, right? What are the big logos that you say at the end of the day, we have to make sure we get these in, right? Here's where we're at. Here's what's happening. Here's what we've done. Here's what we need to do. Helping provide that context is, again, allow them to help strategize with you. They might have advice, they might have guidance, experiences, tactics, things that they've run in the past that worked really well, navigating a similar situation. So again, just really important to provide some directional information to help them understand where we're looking as we look ahead. Now, again, you might want to go and put together a forecast, again, similar to what we did for Q4, right? But again, if we're looking further out, my forecast is going to be a little fuzzier. I'll be able to say, you know what, as of today, here's what we've renewed, but we've got a lot of money sitting in committed, best case, a lot in pipeline, which means probably don't have a ton of visibility. These could go probably either way, depending on where we are in the process. And then what we know that's up for risk. And so again, this helps provide that level of context, helps give some visibility. Try to get as close if you really start to have historical data and you can hone in on your forecasts and understand, on average, based on what customers look like, how they behave, usage metrics, things like that. We can pretty much guesstimate where these customers are going to fall, right? Some will renew, some won't, but we know roughly how we'll get there. The build is going to be important for you. And so this is why it's really critical. You have a good handle on how you and your team are forecasting, putting those numbers together, but then again, adding the stories. Those are going to be critical for you. Bringing the logos to the forefront and being able to talk to your board about who those customers are, what's happening. For the ones that are at risk, why are they at risk? If you have themes or things there. So again, provide more context on the data. It will help you guys all, again, build towards those targets. Now, something else that I've loved doing is, while it's really super important, and I know a lot of you are all spending a ton of time on trying to figure out why your customers leave, find out why your customers stay. Right. And so perhaps you're putting together an analysis that says, you know what, we want to find the themes or different criteria that suggests our most successful customers, the customers that are staying with us and they're growing with us, here are things that they have in common. And so for us, right, at ClientSuccess, I started talking about this in a LinkedIn post. I said, I'm building this success probability score and it's based off of some criteria. It's because we've done work like this that says our most successful customers have these things in common. And so if you could start to figure those things out, you can start to highlight stories about different customers for your board, right? So now imagine this slide is beautifully designed with some beautiful logos here where you can say, hey, look, our most successful customers, they meet 80 to 100% of this criteria, right? As long as they're meeting 80% of this or more, guarantee that they can be successful with us long-term. And so it's really interesting as you start to figure out what that profile looks like and be able to tell those stories, because you want to emulate success. Sometimes we find ourselves spending so much time focused on why customers leave that we're not spending enough time trying to figure out why they stay. And so you might have interviews with your customers. So something that we're starting here at ClientSuccess, or I think we've done in the past, but I'm trying to standardize as more of a regular practice, is really go and interview our customers who are staying with us or customers who have been with us for a while and understand why, right? Learn from them. How have they been successful? The partnership, what is it about the product? But dig into that, because we can build more successful customers that way. It's not enough about trying to avoid all the bad. We want to emulate the good. So help your board understand what success looks like. Build that criteria, help them find that common ground. And I'm telling you, as sales maybe goes through their presentation, your board is going to be like, hey, all these new customers we're bringing on board, do they mirror some of this, right? Do they have the potential to be part of your most successful customers? So just really important that we start to think about how do you take the information that we're learning about our customers and share that across your entire your entire company, because those stories are really important. Now, obviously, like I said, yes, we spend time talking about successful customers. What does that look like? What do they emulate? How do we build more? But it's also important to make sure that you're thinking about customers, why they're leaving, and really analyzing it based on what's controllable and uncontrollable. What I will say is, you'll notice here, I have very few reasons on my churn example. This is, again, a mock-up. This is not real data. But the idea here is that there's really a lot less reasons than you think. I'm sure if many of you go back to think about your reports, you might say, oh, well, I have competitive risk and my customers are leaving because of the competition in the market. That's not why they're leaving, right? Something happened that drove them to go look at one of your competitors, right? Maybe it was a product gap. Maybe it was their experience. Maybe it was something else, right? But they didn't leave for the sake of leaving just to go to your competitors. Something had to have happened. So you really got to think about that as you're analyzing your churn. I think a lot of folks are telling the wrong stories. So hone in on that. But this is really helpful, right? To be able to tell your board, hey, listen, based on things that we can control, 80% of the churn that we had were things that we couldn't control. 20% were things that we could have, we got to get better. Here's what we're going to do. So I think it's really important to think about that and analyze that story a little bit more thoughtfully. I'll tell you something, for us at ClientSuccess, right? We are trying to hone in on this data all the time. We want to know where our customers go when they decide to leave, right? So competition for us in the market, we're not oblivious, right? We know that might happen, that if they decide not to stay with us, they might go and use an alternative solution. It could be even going back to their CRM. So not even another solution that's a customer success platform. It could be another solution that they're going to, like their CRM, or heck, they're going to bring it back into Excel because they don't have budget at all. So those are things that are important for you to know as a business, like where do your customers go when they leave? But just please remember, they are not leaving because of your competition. So just things to think about. Make sure that you've got a tight story on this. Stories are super important, right? So going back to my next one, I really think it's critical to not only be able to show that like breakdown and say, okay, 30% was this, 20 was this, 20 was that, whatever. Tell the stories. So I might also include a slide that looks like this. Again, imagine it's beautiful with customer logos and colors. But for the sake of simplicity and building a template, I might have here, like, here's an example of 3 customers. It could be our biggest customers. Maybe it doesn't have to be. It could be just unique stories. And say, here's 3 customers that left, all varying sizes of ARR, different reasons. But here's the stories of what happened. More importantly, here's what we learned. Right? Your board also wants to know that you're learning and you're pivoting. The stories are super great. If you didn't learn anything from all of these experiences, you're doing something wrong as a leader in a business. So it's important to also lean into those learnings. And then this will be part of your solutioning, right? The programs and the new strategies you're going to design should be based off of things that you've learned because you didn't do things well, or you didn't do things right, or you didn't do them soon enough, right? Or you didn't involve the right people. Whole multitude of things that can come out of these. So it's important, like I said, share the customer stories, give that context, and then help understand with those learnings. So I'm really big on that. The next thing you might want to do is start to introduce customer health, right? Every board, I can't even tell you, like every board I go to wants to know, okay, well, what's the health of your book? So it's important to break this down. What I will say, it is critical for you, whether you're going to include a slide for all of this or not, to talk about it broken down. Not all customers are created equal. Now, to give you some examples, in this mock-up, I said, here's it broken down by segment, right? You might start to see, you know what? Actually, our customers who are strategic customers, they have, ability to be successful much higher, right? They've got 55% of the book there of our strategic customers are all falling into some success, some satisfied state. But as we start to think through emerging or corporate, right, a lot more risk. And where we see the most severe risk is in our emerging, which again, might be your smallest customers. And it could be because of resources. It could be because of expectations, ability to adopt, right? A multitude of things, which is why going back to the profile of all these customers and understanding what good looks like will help you navigate this. But where you find other really cool things, segments, verticals, market, could be stage, right? Customers, varying stages of the journey, customers based on year, right? Like, oh, here's the health of our customers in year 1, in year 2, in year 3, right? You can break this data down a multitude of ways. And I'm telling you, the more granular you'll get, the more storylines you'll have to talk and tell about when you're introducing this. Right? You might find, hey, you know what? Actually, we're really successful in healthcare. We're not successful in retail. And so as we think about this and going back to our criteria and our ICP, hey, sales leader, it would be really cool if we doubled down and invested more into selling into healthcare and focused less on retail because we just don't have the same success rate there. And explain why, right? Like, what is the profile of a customer in this segment that's not as successful? So like I said, health is really important, but I don't think it's enough to just generically say, oh, here's the health of our book, right? You got to give that context. Start to profile it, dig into it, slice and dice that data. Have a ton of fun with it. I used to be terrified of data. I learned that if I was ever going to get access to the board and be able to be invited back again, I would have to get really comfortable here. I actually love this stuff because it's like, it is like, I'm like a murder mystery kind of gal. So it's like solving these like crimes. I'm like, oh my gosh, when you have this epiphany of like, I just uncovered this coolest thing ever, and now I can go save the business. That's super powerful. So please spend time with this, dig into it, and find the story, because there's always a story. I also like to include, again, if you are managing, let's just say onboarding, or if you're on managing integrations or services or anything like that, right? Include information about that. It's really critical, right? And again, I didn't include slides here on support, but if you're overseeing support, obviously you're gonna have slides there too. I kind of left it to customer success for the fact that I only have 60 minutes and it was taking me a long time to build this deck, but putting together some information around this is super cool as well. So in this slide, what I've built here is average days and then how you're pacing. Now, this is to suggest that based on the number of customers we have in onboarding today, right? Customers are going through the different stages of onboarding, right? So I'm, again, made this up. Let's assume that your onboarding follows this process, right? You have a kickoff, you focus on integrations, then you go into configuration, you do wrap up, and then you do end user training, and then you launch. If this or whatever process you have for onboarding can be mapped out, it'd be really cool if you could tell a story that says, you know, average days is X, and we're either on pace or we're not. Right? So if we say it should take 3 days to get to kickoff, we're averaging 5 days. That might not be great, right? If we say integrations on average take 10 days, but we're getting those done really fast, that's great. But this is going to help you understand realistically what's happening during onboarding. Now, what I love about digging into this stuff is really interesting because it helps you figure out where your customers are struggling. Now, in this slide, right, to again, just give you a visual, configuration is taking a lot longer. Right? Our pace suggests that configuration rather should take 30 days. And in this slide, it's saying that we're taking about 42 days, right? What is slowing us down? What is preventing our customers from hitting that 30-day time period on configuration? Now, a good leader, you're going to go dig into that. You might go and meet with customers, you could meet with your team. Maybe there's a lot of notes that you can go access somewhere in your CRM or your customer success management platform, something like ClientSuccess, to be able to go and say, oh, okay, actually what's happening here and the reason why our customers are getting stuck here in configuration is they're not coming into the partnership with the strategy. They're actually relying on us to build it with them. And so because we're doing the work with them while they're building this out, it's on average taking us 3 extra days per module to get this configured, right? That's the story. Now, as a great leader, right, because you're all great leaders, you're going to come and say, so what we're doing is we're making this assumption coming in. We know that they're going to need us to help with a strategy. So we're building templates for them, quick and easy things that they can go plug right in. It's going to speed up their pace for configuration, hopefully get them a lot closer to that time to value, right? So this is the cool stuff you can find if you really dig into all this data and insights. So it's really neat to think, so, hey, here's what's happening. Here's what we can do about this. Now, the other reality could be, hey, you know what? Our estimates on average days is just wrong, right? We're saying, hey, onboarding should take 30 days, but we're actually finding out it takes 90 days. That's not the worst thing either, right? You should also be able to live in your truth. If your product is just hard and heavy and takes more time, if it is, just, you need more resources, or your customers need to think about how they're coming into the partnership better prepared. There's a story there, right? Doesn't matter if things are telling like something positive or negative, seemingly, right? The story is going to help you come up with the solution, and that's where you're going to get most value. So like I said, something like this could help with just helping you tell that story, right? And your board is going to love that, because we do know the importance of onboarding. So this is where something like this is going to help you. It could be, like I said, you could go a little bit deeper into this. You could give stories of customers and support that as well. Like, for example, on the configuration one, because this is just so glaringly off, I might say, hey, look, these are 3 examples of 3 customers who got they were really fast in a kickoff. We started strong. Integrations were a breeze. We got their CRM integrated in no time. We got to configuration and the wheels just fell off. Their leader wasn't engaged, wasn't taking ownership, so didn't have a strategy. They actually passed this over to a CSM. CSM doesn't know how to deploy a software for this. They don't have visibility into what the strategy should be. They struggled. There was a lot of back and forth. We tried to give them templates. They wanted to customize it, right? Like there is so much that could be happening there. Those stories are really powerful. Because those stories also, those anecdotes, that's what's going to help you figure out, well, how do we fix the problems that the data is telling us we have? So this is where it's like, I love this type of stuff. On your slides, like I said, you might not just have the visual here. You might include a few points. You might have a supporting slide that has beautiful logos and shows what's happening. You can go deeper on any of these. This is just to introduce the idea that you're going to want to provide some information around this. If you don't do onboarding and it's integrations, that's fine, do that. If you've got a services team and you pay for service, like let's just say you have a managed service component of your business, you're going to have information around that. Projects, just like onboarding, right? You're either on track, you're not on track. You're losing money, you're making money. Something's happening there. Those slides will need to be included. Now I'm watching the clock here and I know that I've got 13 minutes remaining, so let's keep it moving. I love a highlights and lowlights slide. Of course, you can call them something else. The actual naming convention that I prefer is successes and learnings. Just I feel like lowlights feels really like low. So I use successes and learnings. Other people use highlights and lowlights. That's fine too. You've got to find a way to provide some reflection and learning. And so what's really cool is you could figure out where's the best place to situate a slide like this, but it's going to help you be able to say, listen, I showed you all the performance data. We talked about what's happening in the business. Here's what's working, here's what's not, right? Here's what served us well. These are some things that like we were doing wonderful with. And again, all made up stories here, but let's look at bullet point number 2 in highlights, right? We have this bootcamp series. It's really helping our customers with thought leadership, customer education, product enablement. We do a masterclass for our customers. They're really gravitating towards that. They're learning new things about our product, helping drive adoption and growth. Really cool things you can highlight. Lowlights is the same thing, right? Again, all made up data here, but it could be, hey, you know what? We've got product gaps. And if we can't figure out how to solve for A and B, we're going to see churn, right? Our customers have been very vocal about what they need. We've got to figure out a way to fix it. Could be a shift in the market. Could be, you know, what's going on with onboarding, right? These things could be issues. Your board wants to hear the truth, right? They don't want you to lie to them. They don't want you to like tell a happy story if that's not the reality. What they do want to hear, though, is the truth and how you're going to fix the problems. So I love a highlights, lowlights. Like I said, for us, it's successes and learnings. So things that we are killing it at, things that work really well, things that aren't going as well. That's okay. Let's go. We can course correct. That's the point of these. I also like impact slides, right? So let's assume you're going into this. This was our Q3 board meeting, right? We're making that assumption here. Obviously, you probably had a board meeting in Q2. And in Q2, you said, well, here's 5 things that we have to do in Q3 in order to change the trajectory of our business. Close the loop. It is really important, right? Your board was all there. They heard you say these things you were going to do. Make sure you're saying, hey, of the 5 things that I recommended we could do, I was only able to get to 2 of them. Here's why, right? Maybe some other things took priority. Here's the 2 things we did, and here's the impact it had. Now, impact slides, I love, give them context. What did we do? What was the impact? Try your best to have hard data to support its value. Again, all mock-up data here, but like, let's just say as part of this, I was able to secure 8 early renewals, which resulted in $400,000 secured renewal ahead of time, right? That's a hard metric. We want to start to see numbers and things that we can measure. That's how we really want to tie that impact together. Now, listen, I understand a lot of the work that is customer success, the data is going to be lagging, right? It might take weeks and months. So try to figure out what are the early indicators, what are those leading indicators or those little milestones, things that you can measure ahead of time that start to show the trajectory of what's about to happen. Right? So pay attention to those 2, those data points, equally valuable, equally important. But if you told your board you were going to do something 3 months ago, great. Tell them what you did, tell them the impact it had. So find a way. You might need 1 slide for each program. That's fine too. Give them like the, hey, here's what we said we had to do and why we said we had to do it, right? Remind them this was a couple months ago. They're very busy. They've had a lot of these conversations. Provide them with the context and then say, hey, here's the impact, right? And it either worked really well or it didn't, and it failed miserably. Okay. It's okay. Not everything you do is going to be a slam dunk, right? You got to try a bunch of stuff, and the board wants to see that you're working towards it, right? They want to see that you're trying things, you're testing things out. Not everything is going to have 80% impact on your business and improve and fix your churn problem, right? These things take time, they take work. You've got to slow roll it, but make sure that you've got a story there to tell. Again, now as we think forward looking, solutioning, right? So I told you probably in Q2, we said, here's the things we have to do in Q3. I just showed you the slide there. Q3, here's what we did. Here was the outcome. Now we're going into Q4, right? What do I want to do next quarter? So this could be, here's the opportunities that are sitting ahead of us. And here's the programs I think that we got to put in place in order to take advantage of this, right? To see the improvements we need to see or capitalize on the opportunities we want to go and tackle. Here's what we have to do. So these might be the programs I'm going to design. 6 here on the slide as a mock-up. Maybe we get to 3 of them, right? Maybe you get to 2, 3, 4, whatever, that's fine. Pick and choose. And then on your next board meeting, you're going to go back and do the same thing, only these things will be there, right? You're going to say, here's what I said I was going to try in Q4. Here's the impact it had, and then you go on to the next quarter, right? So just closing the loop, right? It's important for them to see and understand the work that you're focusing your time, energy, and effort that you're building with a team in order to drive the business forward. This type of planning is going to be critical, right? It's not enough to say, here's all of our problems. You're the leader, right? You're supposed to be designing this and taking ownership. And what are we going to do? Great. This is what's happening. What do we do? Now, it's also critical to include some information there on your CS team. I'm only going to show a few slides here. You can break this down as much as you'd like. For CSM management, maybe things you want to do is be able to say like, hey, by each CSM, here's what their book looks like, right? Here's what percentage of their customers will churn. Here's how many of them are at risk. Here's how many of their customers are adopting. Here's how many customers they've got that are just launching. How many are in onboarding? How many are in kickoff, right? So you can decide, do you want the information to be broken down by like stage in the journey? Do you want it to be broken down by risk, right? You could find a whole bunch of ways to show CSM portfolio breakdown. You might want to show some of this trending over time. What I love about this stuff is that it helps you understand high performers, maybe lower performers, capacity issues. Again, all of this data is about storytelling. Now, I might say, hey, you know what? This CSM who has the most risk, maybe this CSM is actually amazing. But what happened is last quarter, we had to let someone go who was underperforming. So much of their book was at risk. CSM 3 actually inherited a good portion of their book. Right now, they're working towards mitigating this risk and trying to get more of these customers into a healthier stage, focusing on adopting, right? There is a story behind this data. Do not let the data demonstrate or illustrate its own narrative for your board. It's really important that you can go a little bit deeper. Like I said, if I just looked at this, I would say, oh, well, CSM 3, they've got a good percentage of their book that's at risk. That doesn't look great. The reality of it is they're a newer CSM. They just took on their book. Your board doesn't know that, right? You've got to be able to provide the context. The narrative is all on you. Now, something else you might want to focus on, and I do believe that this is my last slide before we wrap it up, maybe one more, but I love to be able to focus on things that you're striving for as well. In this case, everyone's working towards building advocates, right? We all know that this is kind of like your marketing machine. And so if you're able to generate more advocates, your book is probably in a better state. Customers who are willing and able to sing your praises and sell in closed doors when you're not in the room, really powerful stuff. So be able to say like, hey, look, CSM 1, CSM 2, CSM 3, CSM 4, they've got X amount of customers who are willing to participate in betas. How many of them are references? How many are willing to speak at events? Who wants to do a case study? Who wants to be a contributor, maybe guest blog or do something else in partnership? Who wants to be a community lead and really help foster and develop the community? You can find a whole bunch of different advocacy programs. Track that, make sure that you have visibility into who's doing what. CSM 3, who maybe had the most customers at risk, actually, they're really great at developing customers into references, and they've been the most successful in identifying potential case studies, right? So again, it's all about the data. It's all about what you break down and the stories that you tell, but be able to highlight different things that go beyond just the portfolio. So that said, I always love to leave you with a do not do these things, mistakes to avoid. So number one, do not forget to prepare. I don't think that your CEO will let you forget. I'm pretty confident that you'll be building this deck for weeks and weeks and weeks in advance of that meeting just to get it all tight. But please prepare. And preparing means going deep, understanding your stories, having conversations so that way you can represent your business as best as possible. Number two, don't showcase surface level data, right? Like I said, without the narratives, without all the voiceovers that I kind of gave you as examples, it's not going to tell the same story. It's not going to land, right? So it's important that you show whatever data is going to be important, but you go deeper because that is where you're going to find all those nooks and crannies, right? All that great information that's going to really help you truly understand what's happening in your business. Number three, don't neglect customer stories. That is where your power is. The customer stories tell it all. So it's not enough to just talk about here's what's churning, here's what's staying, here's what's growing. Yes, those are the highlights, right? Those are your high level numbers, your stories. Go deep on your customers. That's where the reality is, right? The numbers aren't going to tell the story. Please go find customers, go into understanding what their situations are, what makes them successful, why things aren't working, what happened, because that's going to really help you drive your programs forward. Number four, don't have a focus that's all your own. Make sure that your narrative supports the business. I've actually seen this. I got an opportunity to help provide some coaching and mentoring to a friend of mine. They basically had a board deck that had nothing to do with their business strategy and goals. It felt like it was designed almost in a silo. And I was like, well, why are you talking about this, this, and this when you told me that your company objectives are this, this, and that? And so it's really critical that you make sure that this is all going to come together, right? You're going to have one board deck. Yours is a piece of that pie. It's got to support a cohesive story. If your business is focused on retention, don't say, "Hey, I'm only focused on advocates right now. I can't worry about renewals or anything like that. I'm just focused on case studies." Right? They have to be aligned. There's got to be unity. So make sure that you're working as a team with all of the folks who are going to be participating in this conversation to tell a cohesive story. And number five, don't reinvent the wheel, right? You're going to add different slides from meeting to meeting, but find the slides that really resonated well, enabled you to tell the story you had to tell, and build a template. You don't need to start from scratch every time you go into this, right? So if you know, hey, every board meeting, I'm going to do NRR, GRR, logo retention, advocacy, slide on my CSMs, right? There's 7, 10, 20 slides that will always stick. Great. Build them into a template so that way you can just plug in the data every time you do this. Please save yourself a lot of time, energy, and effort. Guess what? To help you get started, I'm going to share my template with you. You guys can start to build off of that, and hopefully it saves you a ton of time. I know that we've got 2 minutes left. This, I did tell you, was going to be a meaty one. So I'm going to see what we can do in 2 minutes here, Dave.
All right. Whew. That's great content, Kristi. Awesome. I know we only have a few minutes. Maybe we'll get to one question. One said that this is great content, a lot of content. The idea is this for 30 minutes, 60 minutes, part of a board meeting? What's the ideal amount of content to have a meaningful discussion?
I think it goes back to the time, right? Like I have had board meetings where I was told by my leader, I have 10 minutes, right? I have got 10 minutes. I have to have a very succinct full story and only highlight what is critical in 10 minutes. I've had others where I was asked to speak for 2 hours. And so it depends, right? It's always my famous answer to everything. Understand what is the conversation you're going into and be prepared for that conversation. If you've got 10 minutes, use 2 slides, right? Like it's just, you come in with your summary and maybe like one other slide that's compelling enough to talk about what's actually happening and what your plan is.